Hi folks, I'm Nick with 7P Overland here at the Virtual Overland Expo Autumn 2020. So yeah, we are going to talk about acronyms a little today, but really what we're going to do is talk about three things that allow you to find and select the right type of fit-for-purpose recovery equipment for your needs and your vehicle. So the first thing we're going to talk about is weight. The second thing we're going to talk about are the specs of the recovery equipment, so you understand what it is and what it does, and also what its limitations are. And the third thing, which is kind of important and often overlooked, is we're going to help you be able to understand the provenance of the equipment, where it's coming from, because these days you do have to be a little bit careful that you're actually getting the real deal. So the first thing we're going to talk about is weight. You know, the gross vehicle weight, the GVW, the gross vehicle weight rating, the gross vehicle mass, used in some countries. All of these figures are the same thing. They're a manufacturer's number, it's an engineering number, and what it really is, it's the never exceed number. Your vehicle can never weigh more than this. It's obviously quite important not to exceed that figure. The reason being is that you're shortening the life of your vehicle. You're also straying into the more dangerous territory because you're affecting handling, you know, your braking takes longer, all of those kinds of things. So the GVW, that's going to be the magic number that we use to specify recovery gear. And by the way, the GVW is that figure when you've got all your driver in, your passengers in, fuel, water, and all the stuff that goes along with overloading. Sorry, I mean overlanding, but I think not everybody really understands the difference between those two things. You know, overlanding is quite a broad church. You know, we have folks in 2,000-pound Suzuki Jimneys, all the way up to big Komatsu sort of 6550s that are those big 8x8 trucks that weigh about 82,000 pounds. And you know, when I'm talking about weight here, remember, it's the GVW I'm talking about. Obviously, you know, the recovery kit that's suitable for your Jimny is not quite the same as the recovery kit you'd need for that Komatsu truck. Getting the right type of equipment and matching it to the vehicle is really important. What we do to make that a bit easier is we kind of think about vehicles in different ways. What we're going to do is we're going to take all the motorcycles and ATVs and just put them over there for a moment because they're sort of a different category. But typically we see these three categories. We see anything below 10,000 pounds is kind of your standard size 4x4, the Jeeps, the Land Rovers, the Toyotas, all of that kind of stuff. The second category in this sort of 10,000 to 20,000 pound space, that's, you know, your Sprinter vans, that type of stuff, your full-size trucks, maybe with a camper on the back or pulling a trailer. And then once you get above 20,000 pounds, you're into this third class. They're the big, you know, maybe they are 4x4s or 6x6s or 8x8s, those kind of bigger trucks with the RVs, the off-road RV type of things. They're pretty heavy and they're always tend to be above 20,000 pounds. So we're going to think about that in three different ways. And you'll see the recovery equipment available will fall into those three categories. Now the weight of the vehicle is quite interesting. If you think about one of those 10,000 pound standard size 4x4s, you know, if that's parked here on concrete, I could push it, you know. I could push it along in the concrete, so its effective weight is obviously somewhat lower than 10,000 pounds because I'm pretty sure, even on my best of days, I can't be lifting a 10,000 pound truck. So you've got this effective weight to think about, and that's not only to do with the weight of the vehicle, but it's also to do with the terrain factor. You know, concrete, flat concrete is much easier to push a vehicle on than soft sand, say, or mud, or snow, or grass, those kind of things. All of those different terrains have a terrain factor associated with them, which affects the effective weight of the vehicle. And the third thing, of course, is the gradient. While I'd be quite happy to push along a vehicle on a flat concrete slope, I'm not that keen on pushing it uphill on a 45-degree slope because its effective weight is, of course, much higher. So those three things, the actual weight of your vehicle, the terrain factor, and the gradient, all kind of come together. All of those things are very different. So now that we've talked a bit about the weights and we understand the weight range that we're dealing with, what we can do now is start looking at the specs of our equipment. Talking of acronyms, where we started right at the very beginning, you know, some of the most important parts of those specs are these acronyms. MBS is an important one. That's the minimum braking strength. That's the ultimate sort of how much force you could put into an object before it catastrophically fails. And in the case of these gold recovery rings, we have an MBS on these guys of 36,000 pounds, which, you know, it is quite a lot. We do have bigger rings as well, which are the blue ones that we have, which are for the larger trucks. Their MBS is 80,900 pounds. So they're a little bit bigger, and of course we have smaller. But anyway, the point being is you can match the equipment for, you know, the weight range that you're dealing with. So MBS is the ultimate failure point. Of course, being good engineers, you know, it's a little bit of padding in that as well. And during testing, they've failed a little bit higher than that. But in everyday work, we don't want to be anywhere near that limit. We don't want to be anywhere near that 36,000 pounds. So for everyday use, we think about another number, another acronym, and that's the working load limit, right? The WLL. And the difference between the MBS and the WLL is a safety margin or a safety factor. in this case of 5 to 1. In other words, if you take that MBS of £36,000, divide it by the safety factor of 5, you end up with a working load limit of £7,200. And that £7,200 you could use all day. You know, you've got that big 5 to 1 safety factor built into that. And you know, when you're using this equipment in the kind of recovery situations you find yourself in, you know that you're well within the specifications and the safety side of that equipment. It is important to understand, you know, the relationship between that MBS and that working load limit and the safety factor. So remember, the MBS is the ultimate catastrophic failure point of any piece of equipment. You know, then you can divide that by the safety factor, and again, with most metallic things in our industry, that's 5 to 1, and divide that by 5 gets you your working load limit. The working load limit is the number that you're looking for, where you can use it day in, day out in absolute safety without any concern that that equipment's going to fail, as long as it's well looked after and inspected regularly. So you might be curious about, you know, how do we get a 5 to 1 safety factor or a 6 to 1 safety factor? Well, that typically depends on the industry that you know, the item comes from. As you know, probably, that most of this overland gear, you know, we didn't invent it. It comes from other industries. Sometimes it comes from the maritime industry, comes from the arborist side of the world, or the lifting industry. And those guys already had sort of industry bodies in place that would design these specifications appropriately. For example, you know, for slings, anything soft in the lifting industry, there's a 5 to 1 safety factor. And that's why sometimes when you look at straps, you won't see an MBS, you'll just see a working load limit. But because you know there's a 5 to 1 safety factor in there, you can absolutely calculate that MBS. You know, a well-made piece of equipment has good labels. Often you'll see with let's just say it, stuff you may have bought from well-known large internet retailers or auction sites, they don't really come with any kind of good labeling on there. They may be marked 6,000 watt, you know. On something good like the quality endless sling like here, you'll see this is rated for lifting because it comes from the lifting industry, and its vertical working load limit is 8,400 pounds. Now that sounds about right for the sort of the sub 10,000 pound class of vehicles, you know, these normal size 4x4s that we have. So that's going to be ideal. And you know, the other thing to think about too is you might think bigger is better, right? But what bigger really is you're using more space in a smaller vehicle, you're spending more money, you know, and you've got some stuff that really isn't well matched to your vehicle. So that's why you've got to think about, is this in the right sort of weight limit for my vehicle? And the other thing to think about there as well is things like, what is the material? You know, for example, here we've got a couple of quality bow shackles. Yeah, one's made by Van Beest, and the orange one here is made by CM. Both good makes. Now, the steel that CM uses is slightly different. You know, it's actually a higher grade steel, and this typical bow shackle here, the one that we've all seen on the trail and lost lots of probably, has a working load limit of 4.75 tons. The CM one's actually rated to 6.5 tons, and it looks exactly the same, physically identical. The weight's about the same, but because the material is different, it has a different set of specifications. So again, going to the manufacturer's website and finding out those specs, it'll give you the full breakdown. But of course, these are well labelled here. Working load limit 6.5 tons. And on the Van Beest, working load limit 4.75 tons. Now, you might not need something quite as big, so you could go down a size. And here we go here. The smaller size shackle here has a working load limit of 4.5 tons, almost the same as that bigger shackle here from Van Beest. In a similar vein, in the same way that the bow shackles, you know, with a higher grade steel were rated higher, you know, these endless slings, and they don't need to be endless slings, any sort of, you know, tree strap or more conventional sling that would use in overlanding, you know, they're typically made from polyester. So the polyester one here, the sort of standard sling that we would use, again rated vertically for 8,400 pounds. If you change that polyester and you put in something that's aramid based, you know, basically Kevlar, it's much stronger. This orange sling here is basically rated twice the rating of the yellow at 15,000 pounds in a vertical configuration, and that's because the material in itself is much stronger. They look the same from the outside because they both have these polyester sheaths around them, but obviously the way to tell the difference really is this one's much stronger and also about 4 times the price. You might be tempted to go out and spend as much as you can on recovery gear. buying the biggest and the best and the most highly rated. So matching things for the right size of your vehicle is very, very important. And that's where that magic working load limit number comes in. Match that to those 3 classes of vehicles that we talked about. Where you are you a standard 4x4 or are you at the other end at one of those big trucks? For example, here you can see there's 3 different types of recovery ring. We've got a real small one there with an MBS of 11,240 pounds, ideal for motorbikes and ATVs. Then we've got this standard size one here with an MBS of 36,000 pounds. That's the blingy gold rings. And then as you step up to something much bigger, with a big heavy camber or perhaps a trailer, full-size trucks, etc., MBS of 80,900 pounds. So as you can see, the bigger ones, there's more in them, they're more expensive. But if you need it for the size of your truck, then you're going to have to get something that big, matching it appropriately. And the same thing applies to straps, slings, all of that kind of stuff, winch lines, all of those things. Buy the one that matches your weight class most appropriately. So we've talked a bit about the weight and the specifications of recovery equipment. Thinking about the provenance of it's also important. These days, unfortunately, on large internet retail websites and perhaps auction websites, it's very easy to be drawn in, perhaps late at night when you're thinking, oh, that looks good, that's a bargain, let's buy a couple of those. What's the provenance of that equipment that you're buying? Think about when you'll be using this, right? And I guarantee, it'll be dark, it'll be raining, it'll be late, you'll be cold, wet and hungry and not in the best of moods. And that really isn't the time to congratulate yourself on 20 bucks saved on a piece of recovery kit that's just failed and left you out there at night in the mud. So thinking about the provenance and what really that is, it's looking at the supply chain. Easy way around this is buy your kit from a reputable supplier. So now you know how to match recovery equipment appropriately to make sure it's fit for purpose for your vehicle and your specific needs. Remember that GVW, the weight of your vehicle, is that magic number that you don't want to exceed. You can look at the specs of the equipment, and now you know about MBS and WLL, and make sure those numbers match the weight of your vehicle. And of course, we've talked a bit about how to prove provenance, buying stuff from reputable suppliers and being able to look up spec sheets and have good labeling on equipment. You follow those steps and you'll end up with a decent recovery kit that'll serve you well for years to come. It's quite easy to get sucked down the rabbit hole when you're talking about MBS and WLL, all the loads and forces involved, especially in the complex rigging and recovery situations that we sometimes find ourselves doing. It's a fascinating subject. Of course, in our training classes, we go into a lot more detail, from very simple stuff all the way up to some of those advanced rigging concepts. The recovery gear that we do sell recovery gear. We're proud that, it's properly engineered, properly tested, that we're proud of the manufacturing partners we have. We were just disappointed at the stuff in the marketplace that really wasn't up to our expectations. So that's the reason we got into recovery gear in the first place. And that's why we like talking about it. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. We'll see you on the trail. Cheers.